Hi, my name's Kevin. I'm an alcoholic.
Kevin.
So Jared has already started to lower your expectations. And I thank you. Perhaps we should lower all the expectations to zero so that if I say anything of a positive nature whatsoever, it'll be uplifting.
It's all great.
Right? The one topic that I thought that I'd like to discuss is something which I thought would be appropriate in a setting of this particular nature. And it relates to the essence of the end stage recovery. The concept of what the spirituality is and how it's actually founded on sound principles which are being ever more recognized in professional communities of psychotherapy and psychology. And with that in mind, the premise of what I'm referring to actually is based on the centering the perspective of what they call psycho-spirituality on the recovery which was demonstrated in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And in particular, the premise for the article and the evolution of the article really is based on that section of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous where Bill highlighted the spiritual solution that led to the personal transformation, and he used the following words. The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had a deep and effective spiritual experience which has revolutionized our whole attitude towards life, towards our fellows, and towards God's universe. And taking a step away from AA, the principle which has been explored and is now generally accepted is that AA was dealing with a revolutionary way of seeing oneself, others, and the investigation with one's higher power. Alcoholics seek pleasure in substances and activities out of themselves, and there is always evident in the alcoholic a fear of solitude and contemplation. I relate very much to this because I often said to those who were trying to help me, all I wanted was peace and quiet. I'll be a happy individual if you just leave me alone, and if I find a quiet spot under a tree at the top of a mountain, I'll be at peace with myself. And that's part of the denial. That's part of the self-deception. Because what I was really saying is there's an emptiness within me, and I am seeking a place where I can deal with that emptiness, and that emptiness will not oppress me. And what we deal with in recovery is a radical new awareness which allows one to live and accept self and accept the now. The whole concept of the premise that Bill didn't articulate in the big book is that in essence we come into these rooms and we're essentially lost souls. How often we hear the verbiage in rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, we cannot define what that spiritual emptiness is, but it's the proverbial hole in the pit of the stomach. The knowing that something is incomplete, there's a lack of self-acceptance, and there's a fundamental awareness that there is something wrong. How often do we hear the stories being told in rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that I was told that I had 6 brothers and sisters, but I always was convinced that I was an orphan. That I always thought that I was the odd person out. And Julio often says, he was one of many, many children, that one of his brothers, and I think he had 6 brothers, said that Julio was found in a garbage can. And he lived in a loving family. All his other brothers supported him. So who did Julio believe? The one brother who told him the story, the fable, that he was found in a garbage can. Because that's what we want to relate to. We want to have the validation of our inadequacy because it's an expression of what we already know we are. We're inadequate. And we don't know what the origin of it is. And we don't know how to solve it. The article goes on to state that in essence, that lack of self-acceptance, that concomitant sense of being ill at ease with oneself, that sense of always having a baseline of anxiety are the common symptomologies of the alcoholic. We are ill at ease with ourselves and we're anxious more so than other people. So what is the instant solution for a person who's suffering low-grade anxiety? Put in that which will instantly resolve the problem. Alcohol works wonders for the alcoholic. There is an effect on the alcoholic by putting in that sedative alcohol, which gives relief in a fashion which is not expressed or felt by the average layperson who is not alcoholic. So what we do over and over again is that we, as the sick and suffering who have this fundamental lack of self-acceptance, are always looking out of ourselves for those external solutions to the problem. And we spend our lives in the continuing pursuit. And what in essence we are involved in is a misdirected spiritual search. A misdirected spiritual search. Carl Jung, who was quite a contributor to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and his literature is referenced many times by the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. Carl Jung stated that the craving for alcohol was really a search for wholeness or union with God. The Latin term for alcohol is spiritus, and he remarked, "You use the same name for the highest religious experience as well as for the most depraving poison. Addictions have often been viewed in such existential and spiritual language." As another author who came after Jung, who built upon his works, stated, "Addiction is fundamentally a misdirected spiritual search that is rooted in a fundamental belief that I am not okay the way I am, and there is a void that needs to be filled, and something external to myself will fill this void." It goes back to the premise again and again and again. We come into rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and we're in that perpetual search for that which is going to fill the hole in the pit of the stomach, and we never find that relief. What we have is temporary abeyance of the, quote, need to continue the search because we anesthetize ourselves, and that gives a fundamental temporary blocking force. But as soon as the anesthesia is removed, the essential problem becomes self-evident once more. That fundamental sense of being ill at ease at oneself. Bill Wilson, one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, referred to alcoholism as a soul sickness or a form of spiritual bankruptcy. Look at the whole premise of the program. The whole premise of the program, and the reason that we have to, quote, engage in the behavior modification of the 12 steps is to aid in the transformation of that terminal self-centeredness which we are when we come into rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, to a person who has the capacity to look for satisfaction in that which satisfies everything, the end result of the spiritual search, the sense of understanding that wholeness and completion comes with a recognition that we happen to be, in the last and final analysis, spiritual beings in temporal bodies. And that's what we are, spiritual beings in temporal bodies. And we find peace when the transformation through the 12 steps is achieved and we have that union with God. How many times do we read in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous? The whole purpose of this program is to obtain the empowerment that comes from the recognition of your higher power, that which is God. Over and over again, the literature zooms into this. And when you ask anyone who's been around with any understanding of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, when you ask them what percentage of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is spiritual, they won't pause for a second. They'll say it's 100%. It's a 100% spiritual program. Finding that empowerment and allowing that flow, that uninterrupted flow of power into the individual is the quest. So therefore, when we look at the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, we look as a mechanism for clearing the channel which blocked us from the acceptance of the power that was going to flow, opening the channel to the maximum extent feasible, and then having a daily mechanism that makes sure that we don't re-block it, so that the power from God will flow into us, so that we can in fact implement what His plan always was for us. But we never agree or accept the fact that God has an individual plan for us until we come to that spiritual awakening. And that spiritual awakening is so simple, because the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells us exactly what it is. And that spiritual awakening is understanding that we are here to seek and do God's will and to help another sick and suffering alcoholic. Because what does that involve? That involves the polar opposite of how we were when we came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. When we came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, we were terminally self-centered. If we're going to understand the fruit and enlightenment and the joy of living in the fourth dimension, living with the Spirit, then we're going to be working at the opposite end of the spectrum, which is actually selflessness. And what is the 12th step of Alcoholics Anonymous all about? Selflessness as the prime moving factor and the focal point of your existence. And if you accept that as the focal point of your existence, then now you're empowered to live the fullness of the human experience. You're allowed to be the better person. You're allowed to be the better employee. You're allowed to be the better neighbor, the better friend, because you have eliminated the core conflicts within you. The one way that 12-step recovery speaks of spirituality is getting out of oneself and beginning to order one's life in relationship to a higher power. One of the authors by the name of Sandra Schneider captured this fundamental understanding of spirituality and summed it up as follows. It's the experience of conscientiously striving to integrate one's life in terms of self-transcendence towards the ultimate value that one perceives. Well, what one perceives as value is we're here for finite periods of time. Are we going to, in fact, engage in petty activities, or are we going to recognize our actual dependence on that which gives us life? Because no act of willpower on my part could will myself to open my eyes today and grant myself another 24 hours on this planet. If in fact we come to a fundamental understanding of how I am here and what God's plan is, it's the will of God that I'm sitting up here tonight. There's no doubt in my mind. Totally ill-prepared, totally with a trapped audience, totally at a point where actually I'm at joy because nobody left so far, and I'll continue, and I'll continue. Addiction is one state of being. Addiction is misguided because it seeks to replace God with objects or attachments that command our allegiance, searching outside of ourselves for the temporary fix. The path is an outer directed search that denies one's true self while caught in the web of self-deception. Denial is the hallmark of the addictive process. And we don't understand the breadth and depth of denial. We think we're intellectually inquisitive when we start demanding that we first understand the mechanism by which we recover before we're willing to implement it 100% into our lives. And when a wise sponsor says to us, you have to take the action first and possibly the understanding will come later on, we feel insulted because this person is denigrating our great intellect and academic achievement. What's so arbitrary about demanding that we understand the cause and effect relationship before we actually commit ourselves 100% to the action? And the response coming back to us in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous is we don't have the capacity to understand the mechanism because we're so far removed from it, because we're operating on a plane of such terminal self-centeredness that we can't relate to this because we don't have necessary relevant life experiences to relate to it. And that's how we as human beings essentially learn, by relationship with that which we know already. And that's how we acquire new knowledge. So that when the individual comes in and lays out all these demands, that it's really a manifestation of denial. The search for peace, relief, and contentment in alcohol is a false temporary escape that masks the real dilemma of empty souls lost within. What is the mechanism that Alcoholics Anonymous employs? The essential roadmap that we employ in Alcoholics Anonymous is defined as is a lack of conscious awareness to a spiritual awakening and constantly and living conscientiously in the new now. That's what we do fundamentally. That's what we do fundamentally. And one of the great spiritual truths is that awareness in the present moment allows us a glimpse of eternity, the sum total of my human potential to exist at this split second in time. Am I utilizing that ability to 100% of my capacity today? Or am I wallowing in the past? Or am I mystified by the future? Am I suffering from regret or paranoia? And the answer is we're denying what our spiritual quest is, and that is to maximize the moment, the present. We race through life or seek comfort in all sorts of false comforts. Most of us, the end stage is when we have the spiritual awakening that we get in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. We have now the new developed ability to stand in the moment and enjoy the now. Living consciously allows us to actively and creatively participate in the beauty and sorrows of life without the cloud of substance that would dull our experience. A gradual spiritual awakening, the 12-step movement, began with the first drunk having an awakening through a profound spiritual experience while detoxifying at Towns Hospital. And Bill later, in the conversation of shared pain, which what it was, and shared hope, and that was what happened with Bill and Bob, shared pain and shared hope, it led to the journey of recovery. The mechanism, we move through the 12 steps on the spiritual path from self-deception to control to humility and letting go. Denial and self-centeredness are the hallmarks of the addictive process. Being honest, and this is from a non-AA clinical point of view, being honest is one of the most difficult things for a life built on denial. We don't understand how difficult it is for a person coming into rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous to even have a glimpse of honesty, because they have lived the life of the opposite spectrum, which is denial. The psychological defenses that we employ: denial, rationalization, projection. are aimed at protecting the underlying feelings of inferiority, fear, guilt, and shame. That's how we are. We're masking all of this baggage that we present, and the last thing we ever want to do is, quote, reveal these to another human being. But the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is so miraculous and so therapeutic. Through the support structure, we're brought to a point of willingness where we're able to, for the first time in our entire lives, to address these issues and heal, which is the mechanism that is so wonderful in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. There is healing. Selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of our troubles, and driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Substances provide an escape by giving us feelings of self-confidence and the illusion of strength, and may have tremendous appeal to those who are submerged in powerlessness, shame, disappointment, and frustration. The psycho-spiritual recovery brings truth, and it unmasks the lie that we've been living. It reveals the falsehoods and allows the cleansing, sterilizing, fresh air to come in and cleanse that which has been putrefied over the years within us. Early recovery, the hallmark is the alcoholic is at peak levels of resistance. Gradually, by asking for help and attending 12-step meetings, the recovering person realizes he or she not go it alone and finds it easier to surrender the tight grasp of control. So the studies show we don't come in here willing. It's a process, an evolution that we gain the willingness by the exposure within the rooms, the nurturing that we receive here. We're brought to that point of development that we begin to let go of the reins and take the suggestions and employ more of the suggestions in our lives. Why is humility so critical in the recovery process? It's recognizing our fundamental need for God and others. The mask which I wore coming into rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous is I was a ruggedly independent individual. When they asked me who my role model was, I always said it was John Wayne. I said, shouting out to the troops, follow me over the hill. And when I came into rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, they said that's a false image. That's only theatrics. That's not reality. The ultimate reality is you in every way, shape, or form are God-dependent. You're not independent. The very breath of life is dependent on the will of God and His program for you. I couldn't accept that. I couldn't relate to that whatsoever, because that was so far afield of all my preconceptions. Next hallmark on the journey, it's the transition from fear to trust. Fear to trust. What is missing is the courage to face one's fears openly. Recovery involves gradually coming to face, not instantly, gradually coming to face both one's fears and life on life's terms. Why is it that over and over again we use the analogies meeting makers make it? We need as much structure in our lives as possible, because this is an evolution, a radical departure. You're engaged in such radical behavior modification that you're really transcending an individual from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum. It's truly miraculous. They can't replicate the template that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous, and they can't replicate it because we have developed the structure, the support, be it by sponsors and contacts, and this is what you will do if you really want recovery. We bring the person into the web of recovery, and we keep nurturing them by giving them encouragement and saying it is possible. You see that individual over there who's relatively well dressed, who can enunciate a complete sentence? That guy was a slobbering mess 2 months ago. Right? Miracles happen in these rooms. One recovering alcoholic stated he never could relax in his own skin, was always running away, restless and unsettled. Many of those who struggle with addictions have described this profound state of alienation from themselves and others. The restlessness is partially rooted in the fear of facing oneself honestly. We're crippled by the fear of the truth that exists within us. But say in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, you'll be given enough support, enough people will hold you up that you can realize that truth and you can find it. To confront the illusory self in the mirror of truth can be a terrifying experience for the compulsive addicted person. The psycho-spiritual recovery is the movement out of being lost, isolated, alone, afraid, and without meaning and purpose, to an inner directed, hopeful search for serenity and peace, rooted in the best spiritual principles of love, community, and intimacy, legitimate intimacy with self, God, others, and nature. What a radical transformation. One gradually discovers he or she is no longer disconnected, fearful, restless, but aware that life is precious, and each moment brings the potential for deeper spiritual awakenings. I stay in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous because I was told when I was in early recovery by a man who I absolutely detested, and that I actually timed him every time he spoke because I thought he took up too much of the group's time. And I would say the man is so repetitive, he hasn't had an independent new thought in the last 50 years. And at a particular point of his presentation, he always said, incorporated the same thing. Just when you think life is as good as it's going to get, life gets more better. The small hairs would go up on the back of my neck. And I said, I'm listening to this Mongoloid, and he's giving me direction about life getting more better. I said, I'm the one who should have a psychological evaluation for being here with all these goddamn nuts. But I understand today that as soon as you think life is beyond your wildest expectations, stay in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it gets better. And old George was right. It gets more better because my life today is better and more better than it has ever been before. And I've been practicing these principles in my life for a long period of time now. And each year is better. And is that because I'm getting better? Or is it because the force and the reality of the power is more present within me? I understand it's the force and the power within me. Next principal point. Immediate gratification versus healthy asceticism. Fulfillment paradoxically comes through healthy asceticism, sacrifice and surrender. It comes not by seeking more, but by being at peace and content with less. How often we hear in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous? It's learning to understand that what you have on your plate today is a gift. It satisfies all your essential needs. Learning to be grateful for what you have is a hallmark of peace and recovery. Because the better bomb isn't going to give you a measurable increase in your degree of happiness and satisfaction. In spiritual traditions, human attempts to receive and respond to grace is called asceticism. That's what I mean by it. The word comes from the Greek athos, to exercise. It refers to all authentic intentions and efforts we make towards fulfilling our deepest desires for what? For God. And that's what the Greeks based it on. For God. So the ascetics were, quote, looking, quote, to minimize what I call the distractions in life so that they could get away from the clutter so they could understand what their true relationship was, and that was with God. Our willingness to enter into the deserts of our lives, to commit ourselves to the struggle with attachment, to participate in a courtship with grace, we need God's grace to help us through the deserts of addiction. Discipline and asceticism get a bad rap, but the truth is healthy discipline makes us free. Healthy discipline makes us free. Psychospiritual recovery involves a radical shift in perception that begins to see self-discipline and healthy asceticism as essential on the road to true and more lasting peace and serenity. The spiritual message has been at the heart of the world's great religions. So we again, over and over, we see again the basis of what we live in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous is based on sound psychological principles. It's in essence, the recognition of who we are and what we are. And it goes to the great wisdom of Bill and Bob tapping into those earlier sources, because they stole most of what they put in the book. But they stole it from the right sources, and we should thank them for that. Right? Perfectionism versus acceptance of limitation. We're all perfectionists when we come in here. And the bottom line is, when we heal in recovery, we begin to understand that we're not supposed to get everything 100%. But what we're supposed to do is be committed to life and do the best we possibly can. And after we do the best we possibly can, we come to that point and say, thank you, God, for giving me the strength to allow to do that which I could do today. And whatever the outcome is of that particular effort, that was God's plan. And we don't, quote, take particular credit for it. And we don't take a particular sorrow from the fact that it didn't meet, quote, expectations. It's understanding that the serenity that we talk about in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous has everything to do with the recognition that we come to a place in time where we accept the outcome of the event before the occurrence. And what do I mean by that? We have that sense of acceptance, which means that we have the responsibility of living up to our potential, acting as reasonable, rational, prudent, mature individuals, and we expend the effort. And as soon as we expend that effort, we take a step back and we say, thank you, God, for giving me the opportunity to participate. And whatever the outcome is, it's good. It's good. And we have that deep and abiding sense of peace and joy and acceptance, that it's okay. It's okay. We have that deep and abiding sense that no matter what happens to us in our lives, we are okay. Because it's living in the reality that being right-sized means that in no stretch of the imagination can I ever command the outcome of an event. I only can participate in those acts that lead up to the event. But I will know unbridled peace, that sense of deep and abiding serenity, when I develop the skill set of acceptance of the outcome of the event before the occurrence. We got to make the transition on the road, and we do it in rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, from isolation to community, because we're social creatures, and I need you. I need your involvement with me today in order to survive. And I will not survive without you. Research over and over again supports the dynamic of isolation to communion. Bottom line is, we need to stay within the structure of this support, because it's part of our essence as human beings. And I'll sum it up for you by saying, the heart of the addictive process is a lost soul traveling down a path seeking peace and the absence from life's pain, yet ultimately destined for a greater alienation from self, others, and God. The root of the addiction pattern is self that feels incomplete, insecure, and lacking adequate resources to cope with life's many changes, losses, and challenges. We become misguided. We follow the false idols. We follow the false attachments, because these promise the quick answers to life's complexities and suffering. Hope lies in recognizing these psychological and spiritual maladies that plague the lost soul. The most vulnerable are those whose history suggests a compulsive pattern. Shame is at the root. Healing involves a gradual psycho-spiritual recovery, the process of acceptance and forgiveness, which is rooted in humility. The proud man will never get sober. because we have to be humbled. We have to become right-sized. We have to understand our interdependence on each other and our absolute dependence on God. And we have to dash the illusion that we are this self-made individual. And defenses like denial and projection make any intervention challenging. And what do? What do all the misguided people do out there? The person drinks, pat him on the back, do better next time. All you're doing is facilitating negative behavior. What we need is tough love. That's good. Tough love. The article, which is written by a MD, PhD, is actually at the end makes a plaintive plea to the community and to religious authorities to offer more space for 12-step programs and to understand that the dynamic that occurs within these rooms cannot be replicated within their structures. I knew a guy named Miller who was the head of a very, very wealthy church in northern Westchester, and he spoke at the yearly anniversary. And even though he was the minister of that particular church, and most priests and ministers, the last thing they ever do is speak into a home group and be a member of that home group, and where he was the presiding minister. And his presentation was very, very simple. He said he had been in that parish for about 16 years at that particular point, and was one of the wealthiest parishes in northern Westchester. But when he came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and he saw the dynamic which was operative, he knew that the healing which occurred there and what he referred to as the redemption of spirit was far greater than anything that he could ever contemplate within the walls of his church. Thank you very much. Is that enough? Did I kill enough time? You want to?
Thanks, Gavin. Great job.
Yeah, for what though?
We're going to open up the last 15 minutes for anyone who has comments, questions, anyone want to